services to people living with intellectual disability. So this session is entitled Diabetes, a Model for Success. So my name's Robert Ward and I'm a full-time GP in Geelong. And I'm also the father of a young man who has an intellectual disability, and I'm going to be your facilitator for this evening. The SPIDER project is an initiative of the Westvic Primary Health Network that is aimed to improve the health services available to people with intellectual disability. And joining us today are Nicole Radford and Kerry Robinson, the project managers of the SPIDER project, and Erin Cummins and Katrina Pilbeam from the Workforce Development Team at the Westvic PHN Primary Health Network. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the unceded lands and waterways on which we are meeting. We recognise their diversity and resilience and the ongoing place First Peoples hold in our communities. And we pay our respects to the elders, both past and present, and commit to working together in the spirit of mutual understanding, respect and reconciliation. We support self-determination of First Nations people and organisations. So firstly, just a little bit of housekeeping. So the majority of our webinar events are recorded and freely available on the PHN Learn YouTube channel. So we'll put a link and access our recorded webinar events into the chat. And we've got the upcoming events on the screen, hopefully. And you can register for the events at the website and we'll put a link into the chat also. Please make note that the Westvic PHN Health Pathways related to this topic is also on the screen, and they're really good resources for health professionals to access, particularly in the area of intellectual disability. Now, the Westvic PHN wants to understand the needs of the communities that they serve. Every 3 years, they ask people that live and work in our communities about the health issues they face and what services they will need to address these issues. So the Western Victorian PHN wants to know what the health issues most important are to you and to our communities, and your ideas for addressing the health issues and what services are required. So if you can fill out the short survey, use a map to tell them about your health and service needs, or to tell them to tell the story that demonstrates what you need. You can also request a phone call or a meeting with your practice to share your thoughts. So head to the project page to share your thoughts, sign up for updates, or request a meeting. Materials can be provided for you to promote engagement with your patients and colleagues. Now, if you've entered the webinar not displaying your accurate first and last name, please type in your full name into the chat box. Only the administrators are able to see this, and that'll just ensure that they can issue with a certificate of attendance. Now, for this evening's webinar, all participants will remain on mute. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box, and I'll ask them on your behalf of the presenter during the Q&A time. There is also a link in the chat box to complete a survey after the webinar, and we'll show the slide again at the end of the presentation. So today's session is focused on diabetes and the provision of appropriate care and information to people with intellectual disability. We're very lucky to be joined by Jayne Lehmann. And Jayne is a nurse and a diabetic practitioner who has a special interest in effective health delivery of people with intellectual disability and the organisations that help support them. She has a wealth of experience and is responsible for the development of EdHealth Australia, a company that delivers high-quality diabetes support and training services across Australia. And this includes online training for support workers. And also joining us to help with our discussion in the discussion time is Dr. Manya, Angley, who's a consultant pharmacist and positive behavioural support practitioner. And she's championing the team approach to care, and her research interests include supporting the patient along the continuum of care in respect to medication management. Now, as a GP, I certainly care for a lot of patients with intellectual disability who have diabetes, and it really is quite an added layer of complexity to the management of what can be quite a multifaceted condition. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say here today, Jayne, because it's a really important topic, and welcome.
Thank you. That was a lovely introduction, and very excited to be here with you all. I know that certainly from the three of us who are presenting tonight, we all have lived experience from the care of our children, even though they're adults now, which I hope will bring a complexity of knowledge to the presentation that makes it more relevant to the real world as well. So I'm just going to share my screen so that I can get this up. I think I've done that successfully. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yep. Excellent. All right, so I'm actually coming to you from Ghana land here in South Australia, and thrilled, as I said, to be part of this extended presentation. So I just have to need to work out, there they are. So today's session, or this evening's session, I thought we could look at why do people with a disability need support for their diabetes, if it's time for change the way we do that, and EdHealth's Diabetes for Disability model of care and support. And then there's time for questions, including a conversation with Manya, Angley as well. So please participate in the chat box. If you think of any questions along the way, that would be fantastic. I was asked to provide some learning outcomes, and I think I'm just overachieving here with 5. So I'm sorry for that if you have to do anything that's linked with proving these. But firstly, it's about identifying some of the contributing factors that lead to the increased risk of diabetes in people with intellectual disability, NDIS participants likely to be eligible for their funding and their circle of support, the rationale around NDIS-funded supports to be included in the NDIS plan of people with cognitive disability, and also describing how the NDIS decides. Now, I don't know if you can describe it, because to me, sometimes I have to admit it's a bit of a mystery for people who are eligible for reasonable and necessary supports, and also 3 of the services that we provide. So that's a bit of an overview of what you might be able to expect. I guess 15 years ago, Australia did sign on to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And that states that parties recognise that persons with disabilities have the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health without discrimination on the basis of disability. So you would think that signing on to something as important as this would improve the health of people with intellectual and developmental disability. But what we know, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with this, is that these people have 2.5 times the number of health problems as people without intellectual disability. I'm just going to say intellectual disability for this presentation, if that's all right. They have higher rates of obesity, psychotropic medication prescribing, and polypharmacy, lower exercise rates, increased diabetes risk. So we have a lot of people with intellectual disability who are living with different types of diabetes and with various success in their management. We also have, with people with disability, intellectual disability, twice the rate of emergency room attendance and a significant underdiagnosis of chronic disease in this group of people. And as a result, as Julian Troller pointed out in the Royal Commission, Disability Royal Commission, people with a disability die 20 to 32 years earlier than the rest of us. Now, to me, that is the statement that probably made me sit up and take notice, especially around the work that I do, but because I also had a daughter with Dravet syndrome and unstable epilepsy and a whole range of issues, it is quite shocking when you think of that in a country like Australia. So it's no wonder that the Disability Royal Commission, I had a quick look at volume 4 of the report that came out, I think it was Friday week ago, and they've said in that people with cognitive disability are subjected to systemic neglect in the Australian health system, that they need to build capacity of the health workforce to get the different needs of people with disability addressed, and that embed the right to equitable access in the policy backbone of the health system, and that's its national standards, and take a person-centred approach to the provision of care. They also said that we need to ensure the health system is prepared to engage in preventive healthcare so that we can help people to reduce the higher risk of mortality for people with diabetes disability that comes from not having things like smear tests and other preventative health bowel tests and things done. We need to change the structure of the system to support and not discourage integrated care. So I thought that that was an interesting thing to look at, given the recency of the availability of this information. And again, I don't think any of us would be surprised by that if you already are working with people with intellectual disability. So with EdHealth Australia, this is my business and I'm the director. My whole aim of the work I do now is all focused on people with disability, whether it's someone with intellectual disability or psychosocial disability or cognitive decline for other reasons. And the premise of our work is to set the person with a disability up for diabetes health success. So we focus on the disability side of diabetes care. We don't try and replace what the health system is doing or should be doing. And in fact, we try and help people to get what they should be getting from the health system. The NDIS funding of health support is possible if someone needs that disability support for their health because it's related to their disability. And it was interesting, I was looking at the list of high intensity support skills, and it sort of became obvious to me as to why subcutaneous injection and diabetes kind of, at times, people get confused with it within the NDIA and the system that's set up. Because if you're thinking about something that's initially linked with your disability, it might be much easier to understand how, for example, a catheter or a tracheostomy would be linked to the disability because it's a bit more tangible. But like many things for people with something going awry in their brain, people don't always connect the fact that it also stops you from being able to think about and make decisions and learn about the things we all take for granted in being part of self-care with chronic disease management. So a lot of the way we talk about this with the NDIA and support coordinators, and I do lots of advocacy work, so with government, is around the fact that this is an area that someone definitely needs because of their disability, and that we're not doing a good job in it because there's these uncertainties. And the services that you're requesting need to also not be available through usual health services that all of us can apply for. So, for example, through Medicare or the National Diabetes Services Scheme. And again, there's been a lot of confusion around what people are eligible for, depending on their type of diabetes, with the National Diabetes Services Scheme. So we often get things that we've put in our report knocked back because people assume that they can get that from the NDSS. So it means another lot of report writing around the fact that even though you've included it in your report, saying once again that no, this person has type 2 diabetes on insulin, and no, they're not eligible for what we're calling assistive technology with the continuous glucose monitoring system that we want for this person, because they're going to be able to understand their diabetes better by looking at, for example, a graph on the system. So it also has to be deemed reasonable and necessary and good value for money. And I think the main thing that NDIS is looking for is where you can save money in other areas. And sometimes that's possible, but sometimes it's not. And I guess we have to put a value on the health of people as well. We also, when we start to look at health support, don't come off a high base when we consider the knowledge and skills of the support workers, because they don't have that basic, I guess, foundation of knowledge around health support. So I would suggest that it's time to improve diabetes support. And with the services that we provide when we're looking at support workers, there's been this lack of training, like I said, around good, just general health understanding, what our health system looks like, how you get the best thing out of it. And so we end up having to put, I guess, retrofit that knowledge at times into the training that we're doing for somebody to be able to then confidently know how to look after somebody with diabetes. We want to increase the capacity of the disability support workers, and we want to create training that is going to address the specific needs of that person's version of diabetes. Diabetes is a complex condition, and we have more and more medications and technology being used in this space. And that's for people with type 2 diabetes as well as type 1. We're only going to see that increase. Now, that means that we've also got lots of opportunities to use targeted medications for people like Ozempic and Trulicity, which are GLP-1 inhibitors that their big advantage is that they help people with weight loss, but they also help people to manage their glucose levels without hypoglycemia. But that means we need to be able to train their support workers to be able to give that injection once a week. We also need to be able to guide them on what to do when those medications are not available because of the worldwide shortages of this medication. The other sorts of things we've incorporated into our work that others could consider is with our diabetes management plans, we have a quiz and answer guide for the manager of the disability service to check that the workers have understood the top 10 to 13 actionable issues in that person's plan. So the advantages of this is that it means that we can prove that people have read and understood the information, and we can also ensure that their level of English or from their learning disorders that many support workers appear to have that affects their ability to learn things can also be shown that this group of people have been able to understand that. So this is part of, I guess, the quality and safety framework that the NDIS Quality and Safety Commission are looking for us to all put in. And that may not always be obvious when you try and decipher how it might be written on the NDIA and NDIS websites, because what they lack is detail and examples of how to action their suggestions around quality and safety frameworks. And so we try and do that to help people achieve that as well. We also look to actively include the individual in their own self-care using picture resources. Now, this is something that not many people have been able to create in the past, because certainly the major services don't have many picture-based resources. There are some around, but to do them individualised for a specific person's needs is quite new, but very effective. And in fact, it becomes very effective for the support workers in their learning. It also ends up being effective for the client to be supported to be more involved in their care. And that means that things that are suggested to them about their food or the impact of exercise can start to make sense, because probably for the first time, they've been getting information that they might be able to understand. There's also the need for lots of problem-solving support. Now, in an ideal world, I guess we would all get that from the health services. However, that can be really hit and miss, and it's often also from the disability side of things that the problem solving needs to occur. And with diabetes, it's often quite complex and can often involve a number of different people that we might need to engage around in order to come up with a solution. So support workers are a big part of what we do across Australia. We also, I guess, end up working with disability organisations, because it's not long after we start working with someone that we often get other people referred within an organisation. And so other presentations I've done here and also with National Disability Services has certainly identified the need for organisations. They're trying to work out how to set up their quality frameworks, but often need the help of someone with that specialist knowledge. And so quite often it feels like we're supporting an organisation one person at a time. And I think increasingly there will be more resources that start to get produced to help the disability organisations to come up with a quality and safety framework that, for example, may dovetail with providers like myself, in that organisations don't always have to do it all. There's often also a blending of the funding for these services being between both NDIS plans and also organisations. And so by looking at things with a bigger picture, you start to be able to create safer systems that are predictable in the way that they are working with people. And for that reason, we often end up working as a training partner with organisations. And we're starting to get more inquiries about that. And in fact, this afternoon, I was having an inquiry with an organisation about how we can work together to do that. The other thing is that when we have training that we're doing with people, we also assign a group leader from the organisation. Now, that might be the manager, or it might be the team leader, or the person coordinating their education processes. We can set it up so that the group leader can see how their staff are going and keep up to date with their scoring and things like that. We have a training program that's online, and we put modules together to cover the needs of each individual. So it makes it very easy for that connection between our service and also the disability organisation. There's also integrating, so for example, with policy and procedure development by disability organisations, they can also integrate some of the solutions we have that we provide to people as a part of the services we do with them. So, for example, we have a letter that we give to any organisation setting up a training program around a specific client's needs that might involve the injectable training for support workers to give injections around the GLP-1s, so the Ozempic or Trulicity, and or insulin or glucagon in an emergency. What we find is that by doing that, we're setting the doctor up for success because we give them information about our training. I would not like to be a doctor getting a request to sign off for support workers doing injections unless I had a better idea of what kind of training those people were getting and if it was legal. And so we provide them with that information. We're setting the organisation up for success because they'll have the signed document that they need as part of an NDIS audit if it occurred. And it also means that we're being proactive in connecting people around what's happening with that individual. So at the end of the day, a quality and safety framework is just about ensuring good practice. But because there's so many moving parts, especially when it comes to diabetes management, I guess we've tried to think a little bit more broadly in the way we set our services up. There's also the strengthening of the team around the individual. So no health professional works with someone with diabetes and a disability on their own. And we do a lot to strengthen communication between all of those individuals with email, group conversations, but also reaching out if there's something that we think we can suggest to help improve the safety or management of that person's diabetes. And also getting a true team around the person where people know what each other's doing and we can all respond to each other as required. I'm quite often involved in presentations to support workers as a part of their team meetings. So we might have just done a diabetes management plan and we'll be able to do that presentation during their team meeting when most people are involved. And it's around coming up with flexible and customised solutions depending on what's already in place. So if we look at the support of people with a disability, here's some of the things that we've produced for other people. I think of myself, I have to say, generally as a diabetes detective, and that's because with diabetes and disability, there's often information in lots of different places. It's not always pulled together, and especially if someone's coming newly into supported accommodation, they may not have all of their past history even available. So we work to do our bit assessing things, working out where things are at, contacting the other health professionals and making suggestions if somebody is eligible for something with Medicare, but it hasn't been organised. And an example of that would be the Medicare program for group education, which provides people with type 2 diabetes with an opportunity to have group education with an assessment, and I think it's 8 sessions. And the model that it works really well with are exercise physiologists. And so that can act as a starting point for improving the activity side of what a person's doing without having to use NDIS funding. But it may be that it becomes such a good resource that the NDIS funding can supplement it after that's finished. And people are eligible for that once a year. We find as well that quite often we need to create multi-layered strategies and wrap them around the person, and break down communication barriers that seem to always happen, especially when you've got people bouncing from home to emergency back to home. And a lot of people with diabetes seem to be in that group. Can I check how I'm going for time, Robert? 5? Okay, thanks. So creating resources that start to address some of these needs is what starts to empower and support people. So here's someone who I've worked with who originally, so this is a young man with type 1 diabetes in his 30s. He was on a pump, but he was manipulating the dosing because he also has a number of psychosocial disabilities, including an eating disorder, or disordered eating it may be, rather than an eating disorder. But a lot of people with type 1 diabetes manipulate their insulin in order to lose weight. And in fact, that's what was happening. We ended up having to stop the pump. He went back on to the type of insulin he was before, which was Novomix twice a day. This was not a good match. And so by moving him initially onto Libre monitoring and then onto the Dexcom system, we were able to give the GP, who was doing a great job with his diabetes, but was limited by having the information he needed. And we've been able to move him at the moment onto Ryzodeg twice a day, which has got a mixture of rapid acting and longer acting insulin, and then some top up Nova Rapid if his levels are higher, and the reports go to the doctor so that he can see those as well. But this man initially was having lots of unstable glucose levels, ketoacidosis, lots of call outs, lots of anxiety, and messaging his dad a lot. And so what we did in his plan was created the opportunity for him to see me down at Malvern, well, my office, to be able to have low literacy education sessions that were supplemented with a diabetes management plan for the support workers and the quiz to evaluate their knowledge, lots of picture resources and staff training, and discussions and communication and problem solving. So here's some of the resources. Just recently, we've actually introduced these resources to give a very firm foundation so that this gentleman, Daniel, can have pictures of his pens on the medication chart so he can check that he's got the right insulin, because he was worried that he was getting the wrong insulin, and then picture resources to support him to look at it and make sure he's got the right one, so that it also standardises how the support workers work with him, procedures for his involvement around doing his injections. And we started a chart for him to be able to fill in each time he did his own injections. And that was part of the reason we were using these devices, because the numbers are bigger and he can be better supported to still do the injection himself. The reward was for him to go somewhere where he wanted, that people would have written into this previously, and then we stretched out the rewards. So we have a lot of behaviour support, understanding Dexcom. So this standardised the whole process of what we do with this gentleman. So that's just a taste. It's very difficult with the amount of work we do with an individual to give you a good taste of it, but hopefully that's what we can explore further with any questions and discussion.
Thanks, Jayne. That was a really interesting presentation, because it is such a complex area. And I love your comment about the communication and the NDIS plans, because certainly from a GP point of view, I don't get a lot of communication from a lot of other people involved, and there may be dietitians or even occupational therapists, and I don't get a feedback, and I don't get a sense as a GP how I can change a person's NDIS plan to incorporate other people, because it all seems that the plan is going to be reviewed in 6 months.
And that's why there's still such a value to having, you know, the enhanced primary care things addressing part of that, because you do get letters back. And also for providers to be reminding those people who are working with them through the NDIS to send them a copy of the letter. So a lot of times a letter or summary or report will go to the organisation about the individual. We have to be thinking of sending them. We need to set you up for success, Robert. And that's the thing, is that we're not thinking like that at the moment. We're just sort of in silos all over the place. But as soon as we turn our thinking around to setting people up for success, we change how we work.
Yes, silos is a word I've heard a fair bit throughout these sessions. I wonder if Manya had any comments following your presentation, if there's anything you wanted to add, Manya, before we get into the questions.
Oh, hi, everyone. Thank you, Jayne. Yes, very interesting. I guess just to reiterate the need for team care and making the most of existing health programs and processes outside the NDIS is a good place to start. I mean, that's our comfort zone. And one thing GPs can do is refer for a home medicine review. So I'm a credentialed pharmacist, which means I provide home medicine reviews. And in addition to looking at diabetes medications, I'm not a diabetes educator, some pharmacists are, but we look at all the other medications that the person's on, and there may be medicines that elevate glucose levels, but we can also look at things in addition to injections around simplification of therapy, which means less dosage administration times and reduced pill burden. We can look at if people have swallowing difficulties or aversions to tastes and textures, we can produce some solutions. We can look at physiological functioning that might affect clearance of medications. We can provide advice around de-prescribing. And sorry, I also have a son with intellectual disability who's decided to make a cameo. Okay, go and ask Dad, darling. 26-year-old young man with autism and intellectual disability and seizures. Psychotropics, for example, antipsychotics can increase blood sugar levels and generally increase cardiometabolic risk. So we can provide advice around monitoring, and we can play a role in collecting collateral information to set the GP up for success, exactly as Jayne said. And we can refer to a diabetes educator or vice versa. The diabetes educator can ask the GP to consider making a referral. But I'll just stop there. And if I get a chance, I'd also like to talk about my positive behaviour support work, which is a way that I was able to be funded by the NDIS and not only improve behaviour, but to help identify chemical restraint and wherever possible, reduce it.
Thanks, Jayne. I suppose that's one of the questions was how do we link into a pharmacist to facilitate to a home medicines review? And I suppose it's not just the diabetic person with intellectual disability, but as you say, those other medications that the pharmacist can remind the GP, you do need to check their sugars.
Well, you certainly do.
Does increase, you know, if you're on these medications, then you need to be checking that and reminders that you'll check, and to watch out for their weight gain and to watch out for the amount of exercise they're getting in their diet.
And their lipids and blood pressure, all of those parameters can be impacted by psychotropics.
Reminding us the importance of doing those.
Yes. The thing with a home medicine review.
I'm constantly disappointed by the fact that we see people with very complex situations. I don't think, if we have, there would only be one or two of all the clients we've seen over the years that have had a home medication review done. Now that's a worry, because we're seeing people with very high risk, and I think sometimes the doctors make an assumption and they don't even consider it for people with intellectual and developmental disability. So it has to be proactively asked for. And even then, I have to say, the referral often doesn't get done by the doctor.
Yes, it's a shame. And it is a service that is free to the client. The GP may charge a gap for reviewing the HMR report and developing the medication management plan, but the pharmacist service, we're unable to charge a gap. So it is available to everyone. It's a home visit. So the pharmacist will go to the person's home, meet the client and support worker and the family, whoever's important to liaise with in the circle around the person. We can provide support workers with further information, you know, for bowel management plans and the use of PRN psychotropics, how to best use that. It's very tailored to what is needed. And since 2020 April, we've been able to provide up to 2 follow-ups after 1 month and before 9 months from the initial referral. So that's a great opportunity. Once we receive that medication management plan from the GP, then we can see how the person is implementing any changes and follow those up. So again, no charge. It's a home visit. During COVID, we were able to provide those services by telehealth, but that has been ceased. Because obviously established in doing it face to face.
Remind us to do more of those, and hopefully find a therapist who gives us some good feedback as well.
Yes, even if it's just to reassure you that everything's going really well, that's still valuable information. And practice nurses can collate the paperwork, and the GP can then consider and sign off. And increasing numbers of general practices have embedded pharmacists as well, so they can provide the same sort of service.
So I've got a question here, and it's sort of related to similar things. So I was saying many of the medications for people with mental health, intellectual disability cause weight gain and type 2 diabetes. Teaching disability staff to monitor and care for people with diabetes. What are the best practice options that team leaders need to ensure that the staff have?
So I think the main thing is that they need to be aware of it, and that we see a lot of people on antipsychotics, and one of the challenges with it is that there's a lot that could have been done before they developed diabetes. And especially I was actually talking about this today, because we don't evaluate if someone can cook healthily as a support worker. But one of the major supports that many people need is support around shopping, preparing foods, healthy meals, being physically active, and stress management. And currently, all those things are not included in the baseline training. So it means that you're very dependent on retrofitting that. So sometimes you have to step back before they get diabetes and make those changes to prevent them. But once they've got diabetes, what I find now is that the complexity of their care, it increases quite quickly because of the non-insulin injectables. And so from a training point of view, we then need to be training at a higher level with knowledge and skills. And it's around being able to pick up For example, how often to go to the doctor, and if there's a change to the medication, that will change your glucose readings. And that's especially true at the moment with the problems with not being able to get GLP-1s. So people will have had that helping, but they may actually need to go on to insulin while we've still got shortages, and that's going to increase weight. So going back to see the doctor or the diabetes team or getting someone like us in to help around that is kind of what I would say for the support workers. And it's also for the team leaders being aware of it and leading their team in conversations about it all and understanding the glucose levels and what they mean. So how to check, think and act on the numbers.
So Jayne, you were talking before about some of those quality systems in organisations who employ team leaders and who employ care workers. What is the responsibility for the organisations to be very proactive in training their staff and setting the standards they want for the people who are under their charge, so to speak? So
I think
from a board level.
So I think my personal feeling in this health support space is that it has to start at the board. It has to start at the top, because the board has got the ultimate governance. And when you read the NDIS information, it's very obvious that disability organisations have a responsibility to support their clients to access good healthcare and to live a healthy lifestyle. Now, I don't think we have the structures in place at the moment for those levers to do that. They might happen in pockets around an individual, but what's amazing, in families, we've done that. So what you see, when my daughter went into supported accommodation, she had never been constipated. As soon as she went into supported accommodation, she was constipated, she put on weight, and then she lost weight because people were trying to give her medications with her food. She would refuse, and then they wouldn't feed her because they were so focused on the medication and not the fact that she needed to eat. And it was only because it happened when I was there that I was horrified that the reason she'd lost so much weight was because they weren't feeding her.
So there are resources for boards or for people in organisations to help.
I think they're
so what they need to look out for.
Well, I think their knowledge of the NDIS at times is not sufficient enough. And I think we have a problem with board governance generally, in that the CEO should be the one also and the chair of the board. They need to be aware of what they are responsible for doing. So they need to go back and read some of this stuff with the NDIS regarding their responsibilities. And this is why currently the health of these people is so poor. We're failing them in multi-levels. You know, everywhere you look, there are things not happening. And in the main, these people can't talk. In the main, they've also have other conditions that affect their behaviour. You know, people don't always look at the world through their shoes, and families have had to do that. So to some extent, I think some of the best advice can actually come from, especially those of us, the three of us, we're all health professionals, have children or have had children with disability. We've thought about this stuff, which is why our services like Manya and I probably do such a good job, and I'm sure you do as well, Robert, because we've got that added knowledge. Disability has been demystified for us. We don't see it like we did perhaps when we were doing our health training. And so we need that to happen on boards, but towards the health side of things, because the social model of disability support kind of, people forgot that these people have health needs. And we're having to now go back and retrofit that. you can't think of a human without health and disability together.
Another question someone's put up on the chat here is, what are the opportunities to prevent diabetes in adults who have intellectual disability?
Oh, huge. When I was doing the clinic down at Minda, which is one of our big disability organisations.
Can you hear me? I cut
Yeah.
out, have I?
Sorry, is that right? Can you
I
hear
can
me?
hear you, Jayne.
Yeah, okay. So
Yeah.
we started getting people to walk to, for example, their appointments because they were being driven around the campus. We got them walking, we got their diet healthy and more unprocessed. The people who were being diagnosed with diet controlled or tablets were either turning the clock back on their diabetes and not needing to have tablets, or getting off their tablets and not developing further, which is unusual because usually with type 2 diabetes, people will start off with diet, exercise and stress management, and then they'll move on to metformin, and then they'll move on to another tablet, and then maybe an injectable, and then maybe insulin. These people were not doing that because we got them physically active. And you saw in the picture of the man on the bike, that was actually from Minda. And so we got another man came off his insulin with what we were doing. So even though I haven't been able to research it as such, anecdotally, I know if we can change how support workers feed people and get them active, you know, so many people don't have an active life in disability support. They sit in houses, they're focused around their disability, their diabetes, and don't get out of the house.
And just to add to that, when you take antipsychotics, which have a high propensity to cause weight gain, some people need to be on antipsychotics for their mental health conditions, and some, only a few, but they need to be on them for behaviour. But if they can be on the lowest possible dose for the shortest possible time, that will reduce their likelihood of diabetes. But also, most psychotropic medicines are very sedating, which makes people less active. So not only do you reduce glucose levels, but you also increase energy levels and activity levels. So a net positive. And if I could just make one point about boards and top-down approaches, there is the NDIS standards and indicators. There's one around medication management. It's very light, but providers do have an obligation that participants' medicines are stored appropriately, administered according to the way they're prescribed by the doctor. And support workers have a responsibility to not only understand, it's a big ask, I think, but this is what is in the standards and indicators. Support workers need to know why people are taking things and what effects and adverse effects are possible. So it is actually mandated within or by the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission. So there is a framework around medication management. I'm hoping that it will be strengthened by recommendations by the Royal Commission. Every disability organisation should have a medication management policy and procedure. There is legislative limbo around medications generally across jurisdictions, and that also needs to be addressed. But there's plenty of room for improvement.
Yeah, I can certainly see for improvement in practical way.
Yes,
yeah.
And it not only safeguards the participant, but it also safeguards the organisation, and ultimately increases quality of life and participation in society generally.
Yeah.
So there's a question for Jayne. How how do we assist people with intellectual disability get technology such as the continual glucose sensors? And
So
the applications
yeah,
I've completed in the past have been rejected. I
yeah.
don't know how I can support these.
So if health professionals write the report, quite often it doesn't get funded. And that's because I think the focus is around what it gives the health professional, but it also needs to be around the disability. So if I'm thinking about this, I had to actually say to someone the other day, I didn't think that they were potentially eligible. And so I had a lady that we were successful in getting it for as assistive technology, because she didn't understand numbers, but she could understand the graph on the reader much better, because there was a framework of where normal was, and she could see it going up in real time after food or with stress or with exercise. And that has actually made a huge difference in her life. Kept her safe, because we were also able to get her off insulin and onto the non-insulin injectables that don't have hypo risk. So
the NDIS will fund these, is that right?
Pardon?
So the NDIS will fund them if you write the...
Well, you have to be able to talk about how it helps that person.
Yep.
And for example, with this lady, it meant that we didn't have to have other people coming in. So quite often, if you can find a cost saving for something. So I've just done a recent report where one of their goals is to get their driver's license, and having continuous glucose monitoring would prevent the anxiety. Now, I haven't heard yet if she's got it, but it would help her address a number of conditions linked with her disability, put her into an optimal framework for learning because her readings are well managed, and take out the worry of hypoglycemia because of the alarms. So it's not a matter of just because they have a disability and NDIS funding. Anybody with type 1 diabetes is eligible for this through the National Diabetes Services Scheme. So you would always go through that process for those people. And we're going to see more people wanting pumps as well. So we've, in Australia, a lot of children have all had continuous glucose monitoring from the beginning, and many, because their parents have got private health insurance, have also had insulin pumps. When you start to try and transfer that technology over to a support worker-led model of care, there's a few complexities that you need to be thinking about, but there's ways. We're about to put someone onto an Omnipod, which is a tubeless pump, and sometimes you can have it for that, but the real problem is going to be respite for this individual. His mum will do a great job and she'll be able to facilitate the stuff at work, but respite is a problem because there's such a turnover of staff, and they just don't read the information. That's going to be the bit that's challenging. So we're trying to think of ways we can facilitate the young man. So the good thing is that it means that we're thinking harder about his involvement, but that needs to be supervised. And how do you do that if you don't know what you're doing?
We're really getting to the end of our time. We've probably got a little time just for a little section. Someone's asked what hemoglobin A1C for someone with an intellectual disability is. I would imagine it's the same as everyone else.
Yeah, so if you're coming up with, you mean an HbA1c target?
Yeah.
So I hate it when I see that someone has been automatically given a high target because of their disability. That is not what we should. That's why their health is poorer. We're making assumptions. We need to use exactly the same process of consideration as we would anybody else. And so what is safe for that person, what kind of monitoring, what medications they're on, all sorts of things, but the same process. So under 7% is the target. And if you've got someone with type 1, ideally we say 6.5%. However, you would need to look at that and individualise it. So don't go for the automatic 8% is what I'm saying, which is what a lot of people seem to be doing. But that will be appropriate for some people. So it's all individualised.
Probably a final question. Yes. Sorry, a final question, Jayne. Are the resources available online that you flashed up before? Because they looked really good.
So
or are they through your company?
So those resources are all developed for each individual. I do have up on the EdHealth website at www.edhealth.com.au there's a rotation of injections site. It's called Follow the Rainbow. We're doing rotation of injections for all people with a need to inject really badly. And a lot of people are getting lumps around their tummy. So you visualize a rainbow on their tummy and you've got 7 colors to follow. It also makes people smile, which isn't bad when you're giving them an injection. And so that resource is on there. Quite a few parents like that too with their little ones. So that, and also the Check, Think and Act, which is all about understanding what the target readings are, but you still need to customize them for each person. So there's a pack of those sorts of things on there. But the others, if you've got people who need these resources, we're really happy to work with whoever's already involved. We won't just take over everything. It's a matter of, if you just want low literacy resources, that's one of my fortes because of everything my daughter taught me.
Great, thank you so much. Look, we are out of time, so we're coming up to the end of the session. I'd really like to thank you, Jayne, for your talk today, and Maya for your contribution to the chat. It both fascinates a fascinating topic and hugely important to the health of people living with intellectual disability and their higher risk of diabetes and the difficulties in managing it. So I'd really like to thank you. And hopefully people have gained a lot out of this session. There is on the screen an evaluation chart, so people could link to that and give the evaluation. So I'd like to thank the SPIDER team and thank the workforce people from the PHN, and thank you very much, and look forward to seeing everyone at the next webinar. Very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Bye.
Thank you, Jayne.